Before the league became a global corporate machine, there was a window of time when the game was purely about who could touch the sky. If you were watching basketball in the mid-70s, you already know there was Julius Erving, and then there was the man who made even Dr. J stop and watch. We are talking about a generational talent who fundamentally changed the geometry of the court. He didn't just jump, he hovered. He was the blueprint for the modern, high-flying wing player, carrying a quiet confidence that let his game do all the talking. According to Basketball Archives, when the spring of 1975 rolled around, the bidding war for his services was nothing short of unprecedented. He was drafted #1 overall in both the NBA and the rival ABA drafts. That kind of leverage was unheard of for a kid coming out of college, but everyone with a scouting report knew he possessed a rare kind of magic. But when a young man flies that high, the landing is what you have to worry about. Why was the establishment so eager to hand him the keys to a franchise while quietly wondering how he would handle the sudden pressure of being the face of a league? He chose Denver and immediately lived up to the massive expectations. During the 1976 season, major sports media reports documented his vertical leap at an astonishing 42 inches. He was routinely operating above the rim, catching lob passes that looked like they were thrown out of bounds. On the court, everything was smooth, establishing a standard of athletic dominance that would inspire the next generation of legends. But right after securing his place as a pioneer of the modern slam dunk, a piece of paper crossed the Denver front office desk that would change his tax bracket and his social circle forever. By the late 70s, he was no longer just a spectacular rookie. He was the absolute center of the basketball universe. His production on the floor demanded compensation that matched his box office draw. He was putting up numbers that seemed almost impossible against professional defenses, playing with a relentless offensive rhythm that left opponents grasping at air. Look no further than April 9th, 1978. On the final day of the regular season, he stepped onto the floor against the Detroit Pistons and dropped 73 points according to archived statistics. It remains one of the greatest individual scoring performances in the history of the sport. He was unstoppable, caught in a legendary scoring title race with Julius Erving that pushed both men to the absolute limits of their abilities. He did not win the scoring title that day, but he proved beyond any doubt that he was arguably the most dangerous offensive weapon alive. And the franchise paid him like it. Later that same month, in April 1978, he signed a record-breaking 5-year contract extension worth $4 million. Press coverage at the time focused heavily on that astronomical number, framing him as the highest-paid athlete in team sports. But that kind of money in a fast-paced city brings a completely different kind of spotlight. Why did the narrative suddenly shift from his jump shot to his bank account, and who were the new faces suddenly crowding his section at the arena? Reportedly, the sudden influx of wealth attracted an entourage far more interested in the city's nightlife than his team standing in the playoffs. Just as the media crowned him the wealthiest man in basketball, a violent, tearing sensation in his foot forced him off the hardwood and into the dangerous isolation of an empty house. For a player whose entire identity was built on defying gravity, losing his legs was the ultimate nightmare. The injury was a severe tear to his plantar fascia, a debilitating issue that effectively grounded the man they called the Skywalker. The physical toll was evident, but the psychological damage of sitting still proved to be far more dangerous. During the 1979 to 1980 season, he was limited to just 39 games, according to medical and basketball archives. For the first time in his life, he could not simply lace up his sneakers and outrun his problems. The rehab was tedious, the pain was constant, and the boredom began to set in. He was a young man with millions of dollars, living in a major city, suddenly stripped of the structure of a daily practice schedule. It was during this long stretch of empty time that the foundation of his career truly began to crack. In later interviews, he admitted that late 1979 was the time frame he was first introduced to a destructive dependency at a party. By his own account, the idle time and the surrounding late 70s nightlife created a perfect storm. Reporters noted at the time that the league had an open secret regarding banned substances, but for him, it quickly went from a casual distraction to a severe personal crisis. When the game was taken away, who exactly was left in the room when the lights went down? And why didn't anyone recognize the warning signs? The foot eventually healed enough to put him back in uniform, but a completely different set of statistics began to emerge on the coach's clipboard. When a player loses a step in this league, the decline usually happens right out in the open. The jump shot goes flat, the defensive rotations get a little slower, and the box score tells the truth. But his situation was entirely different. When he returned from the foot injury, he still looked like the Skywalker on his best nights, but the consistency that once made him terrifying was gone. The public facade was beginning to crack, and behind the scenes, a severe personal crisis was rapidly outpacing his professionalism. According to archive statistics, during the 1980 to 1981 season, his scoring average dropped to 25.5 points per game, and by the following year, it plummeted to 14.9. For a man who had once effortlessly challenged for the scoring title, this was a massive red flag. Reporters noted at the time that the locker room was whispering about changing dynamics, suggesting the drop in production was not just about a lingering foot problem. The relationship with the Nuggets management, particularly with head coach Doug Moe, was deteriorating fast. Moe was a no-nonsense basketball mind running a high-paced system, and he had little patience for a star who could not stay reliable. The friction eventually spilled out of the locker room and into the paperwork. In 1981, major sports media reports confirmed he was subjected to a series of fines for missing practices and failing to board team flights. Why did the front office wait so long to intervene? And what changed behind closed doors that made the situation impossible to hide? The reality was that his destructive dependency had become the loudest secret in the organization. Realizing their franchise centerpiece was rapidly depreciating, Denver management picked up the phone and made a quiet, desperate call to the Pacific Northwest. There is a long-standing myth in professional sports that a change of scenery can cure anything. The idea is that if you put a struggling player in a new jersey, in a new city, away from the familiar distractions, the old version of the man will simply reappear. Seattle was willing to take that gamble. They had a strong roster and believed that adding a player with his historic ceiling could push them back into championship contention. But the reality of the transaction spoke volumes about his damaged value. According to public trade records, on June 16, 1982, the Denver Nuggets traded their former #1 overall pick to the Seattle Supersonics in exchange for Bill Hanslick and a first-round draft pick. To the casual fan, trading a generational talent for what amounted to pennies on the dollar was shocking. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the sheer imbalance of the deal, leaving fans confused as to why Denver would let him walk for so little. But the executives around the league understood exactly what was happening. When the 1982 training camp opened, major sports media reports described him arriving in Seattle determined to rebuild his reputation. He was saying all the right things, trying to project the image of a focused veteran ready for a second act. And for a while, the court offered him a sanctuary from his off-court battles. He showed brilliant flashes of his former self, reminding everyone in the building just how high he could fly when his mind was right. For a brief, shining moment, the old magic returned under the Seattle lights, culminating in one last trip to the All-Star game before the bottom completely fell out. His first season in Seattle was a masterclass in survival. He was relying on pure natural talent to mask the heavy toll his lifestyle was taking on his body and mind. He was still capable of giving you 20 points on any given night, floating through the lane and finishing over bigger defenders. The local fans embraced him, and for a few months, It genuinely looked like the change of scenery had worked its magic. By February 1983, his performance was strong enough that he was selected to the NBA All-Star Game. According to Basketball Archives, this would stand as his final appearance on that prestigious stage. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with the best in the world, smiling for the cameras, seemingly back on top. But the tension was quietly building. Seattle was a franchise trying to win a championship, and their newly acquired star was fighting a deeply personal battle just to keep his life together. The dependency issues had followed him across the country, and soon, the effort required to hide them simply became too much. The situation reached a critical breaking point less than 2 months later. In April 1983, according to press conference transcripts, he was formally admitted to a Denver rehabilitation clinic to address a severe personal crisis. In interviews later in his life, he acknowledged that this was the moment the illusion shattered entirely. He could no longer separate the basketball player from the man struggling to survive off the floor. He completed the program and promised a return to greatness, but a fateful trip to New York City the following spring would ensure he never played another meaningful game. In the spring of 1984, the Seattle Supersonics traveled to New York. By this point, the entire league knew he was walking a dangerous line, but nobody could have predicted the specific, absurd way the final blow would be delivered. He was a world-class athlete whose entire livelihood depended on his legs, yet he found himself navigating the chaotic, unpredictable environment of Manhattan's most notorious nightlife venue. It was a place synonymous with excess, and for a man already fighting a severe personal crisis, it was the absolute worst room to walk into. According to television reports from March 1984, the evening ended in a devastating, career-altering catastrophe at Studio 54. The exact details of how the night devolved have always been slightly contested. As some reports claimed, a confrontation escalated into a sudden physical altercation near a staircase. In the ensuing chaos, the man known as the Skywalker tumbled violently down a flight of hard concrete stairs. He did not get up the same way he went down. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the sheer shock of the setting, pointing out the tragic irony of a basketball genius losing his greatest physical weapon in a crowded nightclub. The medical diagnosis was swift and brutal. Later that same month, in March 1984, major sports media reports confirmed he had suffered multiple torn knee ligaments. The damage was extensive and, given the medical technology of the era, largely irreversible. The doctors delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves through the league, leaving the Supersonics management staring at an expensive contract and a permanently grounded star. When the medical reality set in, the emotional response from fans and peers was overwhelming, but the mechanics of professional sports are inherently cold. A severely damaged knee on a player with a highly publicized destructive dependency left the Seattle front office with very few options. The grace period for rehabilitation had already been exhausted, and the franchise had to make a ruthless business decision to protect its own financial future. According to public documents, the definitive end came in June 1984, when he was officially released by the Seattle Supersonics. The termination of his contract created an immediate financial and professional void. Just like that, the daily routine of practices, team flights, and arena crowds vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence. The press narrative shifted overnight. He was no longer covered as a struggling superstar attempting a heroic comeback. He was now written about as a tragic cautionary tale of wasted potential. According to archive statistics, the 1984 season marked the sudden close of his NBA run, leaving him with an exact career average of 22.7 points per game. That number stands as a permanent reminder of his sheer offensive brilliance, but it also highlights the abruptness of his exit. With the paycheck stopped and the cheering completely silenced, the reality of a life without basketball began to close in. Refusing to accept that the lights had been turned off for good, he quietly packed his bags a year later and flew to Indiana for a workout that would force him to face a brutal reality. The hardest thing for any professional athlete to do is to look in the mirror and admit that the body no longer obeys the mind. By the time he arrived in the Midwest, he was carrying the weight of his legacy on a heavily compromised knee. In February 1985, major sports media reports documented his desperate final attempt at a comeback when he received a tryout with the Indiana Pacers. The intention was pure, but the physical explosion that had once defined his entire identity was permanently gone. He could no longer elevate over defenders, and without that vertical threat, the tryout was ultimately unsuccessful. When the Indiana front office closed the door, the finality of the situation sent him into a dangerous downward spiral. Stripped of his uniform and out of chances, he found himself adrift in the late 1980s. The contrast was incredibly jarring. Just a few years earlier, he was signing record-breaking multi-million-dollar contracts, and now he was entangled in a lifestyle that kept pulling him further away from the game. Without the structure of a team, his personal crisis deepened, leading to serious legal trouble that heavily damaged his remaining public reputation. Court records showed the grim reality of how far the mighty had fallen. In 1987, according to public documents, he was ordered to serve a 130-day sentence following an altercation and a subsequent probation violation. Reporters noted at the time how shocking it was to see a man who had once been the idol of millions standing in front of a judge under such bleak circumstances. Locked away from the spotlight and stripped of his former glory, the man who inspired a generation had to decide whether to let his story end in disgrace or begin a long, grueling climb back to respectability. Hitting absolute rock bottom often forces a man to make the most difficult choice of his life. Either stay down and fade away, or start the agonizingly slow process of digging out. For a player who was used to effortlessly floating above everyone else, the climb back up from the concrete was the hardest challenge he would ever face. He had to completely remove himself from the fast-paced, toxic environments that had fueled his downfall, stepping away from the lingering shadows of Denver and New York to find his footing back home. In his later memoirs and during intimate player interviews, he pinpointed 1988 as the definitive turning point, the year he broke the cycle and began his permanent journey towards sobriety. According to people around the situation, the transformation was quiet and entirely unglamorous. There were no flashing cameras, no massive shoe contracts, and no roaring crowds. Instead, he traded the exclusive VIP rooms for local youth gymnasiums. He immersed himself in community service across North Carolina, working as a mentor to kids who were facing the exact same dangerous temptations he had barely survived. His dedication to rebuilding his life and giving back to the game slowly began to repair his fractured public image. The basketball establishment, which had essentially exiled him a decade earlier, finally recognized the magnitude of his turnaround. According to Basketball Archives, his ultimate professional vindication arrived in 1996, when he was officially inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Standing at that podium, he had finally reclaimed his good name, but his greatest validation did not actually come from a bronze plaque or a voting committee. It came exactly 13 years later from a phone call made by the most famous athlete on the planet. By the late 2000s, the narrative around the Skywalker had mostly settled into a comfortable, if somewhat melancholy, rhythm. Older fans respected his undeniable prime, but to the younger generation, he was largely viewed as a vintage highlight reel attached to a heavy cautionary tale. Then the greatest player to ever touch a basketball completely flipped the script and forced the world to look at the Skywalker through an entirely different lens. When you think of Michael Jordan, you think of unparalleled dominance, a ruthless competitive drive, and a standard of excellence that defined modern sports history. Jordan did not hand out compliments easily, and he certainly did not share his massive spotlight unless a person meant something deeply personal to his own journey. When it was time for Jordan to take his own place in history, television reports in September 2009 covered his highly anticipated Hall of Fame induction ceremony. The global basketball media fully expected a legendary Chicago Bulls teammate or his iconic college coach, Dean Smith, to stand beside him. Instead, Jordan personally asked David Thompson to be his official presenter. The choice stunned a few modern reporters, but it made perfect sense to anyone who truly understood North Carolina basketball heritage. During his time at the microphone, the truth came out directly from the source. In a widely circulated press conference transcript from that night in 2009, Jordan explicitly told the audience that he grew up idolizing Thompson. He revealed that the Skywalker was the only player he ever truly wanted to emulate, the man who first showed him what it meant to play above the rim. To have the ultimate basketball icon point to you and say, "That is who I wanted to be," cemented a profound truth that the statistics and the scandals often try to hide. Basketball is a game of constant evolution, and every single generation builds its game on the shoulders of the one that came before it. You simply cannot get to the spectacular aerial dominance of the 1980s and 90s without the man who first proved that the air above the rim was a playable surface. He was the vital bridge between the flashy, renegade style of the ABA and the structured, polished, golden era of the NBA, bringing a sense of pure theater to the floor that the league desperately needed to survive the turbulent late 70s. His time at the absolute pinnacle of the sport was frustratingly short, derailed by a destructive dependency and a catastrophic knee injury. But the impact he made during those healthy years was so seismic that the league could not erase him from the history books, no matter how complicated his exit had been. The respect of his peers was solidified in writing when, according to major sports media reports, he was named to the exclusive NBA 50th anniversary all-time team in 1996. He was chosen over dozens of players who had much longer, safer, and statistically steadier careers, proving that his absolute peak was entirely undeniable. That legacy has endured long past his playing days and his subsequent personal struggles. According to public documents and archived league records, his name was called again in 2021 when he was officially selected to the NBA's 75th anniversary team. The story of David Thompson is not just a tragedy about a sudden fall from grace, and is not just a triumph about surviving the darkness. It is the complex, unvarnished truth of a pioneer. When the old tape rolls today, the game forces you to look past the shadows and the early exit, because when he took off from the hardwood, he is remembered not for how hard he fell, but for how incredibly high he flew.